Welcome back to the 2021 Brooklyn Antiquarian Book Fair, the virtual edition for the second year in a row. And we're all looking forward to being back, hopefully next year, at our location in Greenpoint at the Brooklyn Expo Center for the live fair. But this year, the fair again runs from September 23rd through the 26th and can be accessed at brooklynbookfair.com. And right now, we're really thrilled to have another incredible guest. And this time, I don't want to mess up her name. It's Paige Zaferiou. Is that right, Paige?
That's right.
All right.
That's correct. Great job.
And you can access her website at paigezaferiou.com, paigezaferiou.com, and we'll put it up on the screen as well. And I'm just going to read here a basic description before we jump into the interview. Paige describes herself as an eclectic sacred artist with a mission to be kind, make art, and offer guidance through weird transitions, death, and divorce. She also describes herself as being inexorably drawn to her own shamanic path, which has led her to be an instructor in journaling, where she leads students in discovering their holy helper spirits through the process of journal writing. She also offers tarot readings and other esoteric forms of channeling and healing. So, Paige, there's an enigmatic factoid that you drop about yourself on your website involving a European shaman at an Oregon gas station when your parents allowed you to be baptized when you were a child, whom your parents allowed you to be baptized by when you were a child. And can you expand on that? And were you brought up basically in an occult environment, or is this something that came to you over time? I guess this is kind of the first biographical question. Let's get into your story right away.
Yeah. So this is a wild story. Let's see. It all began, I guess my parents are here from the East Coast. They met in California, moved back east, and were living in semi-rural Massachusetts when I was born. And my dad is very outgoing, so he noticed this woman with organ plates at the gas station. And since he used to live in Oregon, he got real excited, started chatting with her. Turns out her and her husband had just moved to the area, didn't have any friends. So of course my dad invites them over for dinner, and they become fast friends. And when I was born, this woman asked if she could do a baptism ceremony. And I had heard as a child, oh yeah, you were baptized in our living room. And I'd seen a couple of photographs, but I actually didn't know that it was a shamanic ceremony until after I had begun walking down the shamanic path myself in my mid-20s. So I was living out in San Francisco in my mid-20s where my parents met. And I started feeling this call to become more spiritual. I started getting really interested in shamanism, and I called my parents up and was basically like, Mom, Dad, I think I want to be a shaman. And they were like, that's so funny. You were baptized by a shaman when you were a baby. And I was like, what? Are you serious? They were like, yeah, we never told you that. I was like, no, you did not. You never mentioned that detail, no. Thanks for that. So it was actually a total surprise to me. I had always kind of assumed my parents are not religious. They're not particularly spiritual. They're kind of like hippies that grew up to sort of be more or less normal members of society. So we were not raised religiously. We were not raised particularly spiritually, except the basic, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so this was a huge shock to me, a huge surprise. And it's also interesting that my younger sister, who's 4 years younger, was not baptized at all. This was like, these people were in my parents' lives just long enough for this woman to go through this shamanic baptism on me. And then they sort of drifted apart. My parents moved to another town closer to the city, and they sort of parted ways. So the timing and synchronicity on that, it blows my mind.
I'm wondering, I guess my question here is about sort of the zeitgeist and how your practice kind of flowed into that change in kind of like the liberal consciousness towards the occult?
Yeah, for sure. So my interest in the occult started in the late 90s when I was kind of becoming a teenager. And, there wasn't a ton of information available to me at the time. It was pretty Wicca heavy. It was, Silver Raven Wolf. And then of course, Harry Potter came to the States. And I think for a lot of young liberals in the United States, that was this huge kind of gateway almost. Which sounds funny to say. It's almost like, oh, all the conservative parents' worst fears that Harry Potter is converting you to occultism. In some ways, kind of true. I remember just feeling so excited with possibility, and something rang so true in the idea that magic is real, that it's part of our heritage as human beings. And I think that this zeitgeist, this increase in interest in the occult and in spirituality is the result of humanity kind of going to the extreme on both ends, right? So you have the last 2,000 years where organized religion went to the far extreme and became a means of control and became something where, you have Christianity colonizing indigenous spiritualities from Europe and then to, North America, South America. And so you have it go all the way to this extreme where spirituality is controlling. Spirituality is, associated with oppression. And then so you have people overcorrect to extreme secularity, right? And they're like, okay, well, all of that is bad. All of that is oppressive. We got to get rid of that. We have to root that out. And now I think people are realizing that's not good for us either. That's not really, that's also a tool of oppression, and also something that is not good. It's not well to be completely disconnected from spirituality. And that for me ties into our relationship to the natural world. Really, I think that's what it's at the heart of it. I feel like the world is trying to recorrect that and find that middle, that true path of, we are part of the natural world. We as human beings have a very unique place in the natural world. We have the human mind that can look above and see the whole picture, and we have the ability to steward the world and take care of it and all of its beings. And for me, spirituality is an awareness of the interconnectedness of everything, and we are interdependent on everything. And I really think that this increase in interest in the occult and in spirituality is about people trying to get back to that. People recognizing that something's not well in the world now, that this extreme disconnect from our place in the natural world is not well. It's going to kill us. It won't kill the planet per se, because the planet is much bigger than us, but it may kill us. And it will definitely kill a lot of our plant and animal relations before it gets us, right? Like, they're the vulnerable ones, truly. And I think people know that deep down, even if they don't fully realize it, they know that this isn't right. And they know also that the extreme other end of spirituality with the organized religion and oppression and colonization isn't well either. So people are seeking that middle path. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, like a third way, something where the organizing principle isn't such a simulation. Let's turn maybe to some of the things that are a major part of your practice, if you don't mind. And then, I also want to talk to you eventually about, where you're broadcasting from. But let's maybe just start talking about some of the things that are of major interest to you, things that you offer. And we'll go from there.
Yeah. So let's see, my daily practice, let's start there. So much of it's at the very core base of my practice is what I guess I would, to borrow a term from my primary sacred arts teacher, Brianna Saucy, it's about cultivating calmness. which at heart is kind of it's about being present for one thing. You know, being too much in the past, being too much in the future creates a lot of anxiety, pulls us out of our bodies. So focusing on coming back to the body, being really present, and from that place, being able to enact the changes that you want to see in yourself and your world, and then in the greater world, right? That's all magic really is. It's just affecting the change that you want to see, whether it's in yourself, in someone else, in your small community, or in your macro community of the whole world, right? That's all it is. Magic can also be said to be increasing the probability that something will happen. You're trying to affect the change, and that's basically what magic does. You're increasing the possibility of what you want to happen happening, right? So that's what it all kind of comes back to for me, and that's why I do a lot of divination. Is it's all about getting people clear on where they are now, what's the real truth of their current situation, then also getting clear on where they would like to be, where they want things to be, envisioning that ideal change so that then they can move from point A to point B.
This sort of
right?
self-fulfilling prophecy, but in a positive way.
Yeah, right? Like you know, they say you are what you think. And so that's really where it starts, is changing your thinking. When you change your way of thinking, you change the way you see the world and the way you act in the world. And that, like, it's enormous, the power that cascades from that simple philosophy.
Yeah.
You know, so that's why I like to work with people long term, best of all, because it's a long game. It's not just a wave your magic wand and like everything's better. You don't just do a spell and then suddenly you have all the wealth and the love that you want. This is a long term, this is a daily practice. They say, you know, what the saying is: before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water; after enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. You know, this is a daily life situation. Spirituality is not just for those special times when you really need something, or those special high holy days when you're supposed to go to church or wherever. This is about how you live your daily life, and how, not inside your own head, not just exerting change on the world to make it better for you in your sort of ego self. This is about being happy and feeling like you are in tune with the rest of the world. You know, happiness, true happiness, doesn't just come from self-fulfillment and that sort of like, yeah, I got all the stuff I want, awesome. It's like, no, how do I fit in with my community, with my family, with the world as a whole? And that starts for me with cultivating calmness every day.
Can you talk about journaling? Because that's a seemingly a new type of divination process that, I mean, I don't know anybody else that's particularly teaching getting in touch with what you call holy helper spirits.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that there are other people that are doing things that are also creative and involving creativity and writing that have to do with divination and spirituality. But can you just talk about what it is that you're teaching right now?
Yeah, so I'm teaching people how to get to know what I call holy helper spirits. And again, holy helper is a term that I have picked up from my primary sacred arts teacher, Brianna Sassi, who is teaching currently still. I love her. I highly recommend her work for everyone and anyone who's interested in the occult or spirituality and the sacred arts.
What
And
kind of
so
media?
holy,
Sorry, what kind of media is it? Is Brianna putting out books or classes?
she is putting out books. She's the author of Making Magic, and then the newest book is Star Child, about using astrology for parenting. And then she has a digital academy called the Sacred Arts Academy, which is the very first of its kind, like a 4-year digital teaching platform for a holistic view of the sacred arts. It's fantastic. I've been studying with her for about 8 years now, and she really knows what's going on. She knows what's good. She's down in San Antonio, Texas, and she's just her teaching is both audio and digital text, and so I find that helpful for people. But as a writer myself, I've gravitated towards teaching journaling. And one of the big reasons why is because when you're doing spiritual, occult, liminal work, one of the problems I have encountered is remembering what happened, remembering your own experiences when you're in that in-between state between the present physical world and the other world, you know, the kind of spirit world, the world of connecting to the occult, to spirits, to the land, you know, to your dreams, to your ideas and imagination. That in-between place can be harder to bring back to the waking world, and then to really remember what your experiences were, what happened, what wisdom did you get from that, what insight did you get from that. You're in a totally different state of mind. You know, sometimes you're in a full-blown trance state. Sometimes you're just in that like almost hypnagogic state between waking and dreaming, where you're able to receive information from the other world, right? And so your holy helper spirits are those non-corporeal entities that are basically your spirit guides, is maybe another way to put that. And they can be anything from a fictional character, a character from mythology, an animal, a plant, or another natural phenomenon like the wind, trees, the ocean, other bodies of water. These can all be worked with as holy helper spirits or spirit guides. And that's part of this whole interconnectedness, is it's really true. No one is an island. You can't do it all by yourself. And in this modern world, especially in our American culture of individualization, is that a word? We're kind of told you have to do it all by yourself. You have to be a big boy, you have to be a big person and do it all by yourself and pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And that's nonsense. It's nonsense. We need help, not just from other people, but from the non-corporeal world.
And you have a holy helper spirit that you, or maybe I don't know, maybe that's not how you would want to turn it, but you have a connection with someone from the other side that came, I believe, unexpected. I only know briefly from our short conversation before this interview, where I didn't want to get too much out, but can you tell me about that connection that you have?
Yeah, I believe you're talking about Spock and Leonard Nimoy,
Yeah.
who's a very dear holy helper to my heart. You know, of course, I grew up with Star Trek on TV all the time, and I always connected to this idea of a better future where we've transcended, you know, war and hunger and poverty, and we take care of each other and we work together. And of course, Star Trek is a product of its time, and there's some issues with it, but the power of a character like Spock, who's connected and resonated with so many people, this idea of someone who is between worlds, half human, half Vulcan, trying to find his place. He's not Vulcan enough to be Vulcan, but he's not human enough to be human. You know, he's been resonating with people for decades. And Leonard Nimoy, someone who's also born in Boston like myself, and is someone that I really connected to even before he passed away. As an artist, you know, he, like myself, is a visual artist. He does photography and I do watercolor painting, but the gallery that represents him is the same gallery that my watercolor mentor is represented by. And so when I was coming up as a visual artist, I was surrounded by Leonard's work, his photography, and in particular, his photography series on the divine feminine. And this spoke to me so much of who Leonard was as a person. Is he did this photography series on the divine feminine, and he got some feedback, some constructive feedback. They were like, why are these all very thin body types? Why are all these women very conventionally attractive or very conventionally shaped? And so he took that criticism to heart and did a whole other photography series of differently sized bodies. And the power of seeing those images side by side and how he took that feedback in really spoke to me as a young artist, and the way that we're not just putting stuff out there for our own satisfaction, but we're in a dialogue with the world and with each other. And that was so powerful to me. And then the timing of his passing coincided with my sort of calling and initiation into the world of mediumship and death work. And so when he passed, it was a very intense experience for me. And I had a bit of a spiritual encounter with him or his essence or his sort of energy. And it was an extremely formative experience for me, right as all of this world of spirit after life was calling me to come work and to understand more about how we need some guidance around that, and how you can be spiritual in life and you still maybe don't have a full understanding, or there's fear. There's a lot of fear around death in our society. And again, like so much of our problems, I think it comes back to a disconnect between ourselves and the natural world or the spiritual world. We sanitize death, we keep it tucked away in hospitals and funeral homes, and it becomes so much more frightening than I think it has to be.
Yeah. I'm just struck by what you were saying about Leonard's two different photography series on the same subject and his approach, because he's coming out of the belly of the beast, Hollywood, where those kind of things are really put at the forefront for people who want to be on camera. And there's other things that I only found out much later, because I was a Star Trek fan as well in the 90s from watching reruns, also The Twilight Zone, and just the new series that were coming out. But Leonard always loomed so large, and I only later found out that he did record albums where he referenced Bilbo Baggins and Tolkien's Lord of the Rings series, and also that he did a version, half sung, half spoken, of the song Nature Boy, which was written by a composer named Eden Abez, or Abi, whom I have done 26 years of research about. And because this is a book fair and we're always looking at things having to do with media, you are actually working on a project. You talked about being a painter, a watercolorist, somebody who has a relationship with Spock. And is it true that you're working on a tarot deck related to Star Trek?
I am. I'm working on a Star Trek tarot deck. I have been working on it for about, like 5 years now. It's such an enormous project, so much bigger than I even could have conceived of. And this is that kind of project, I'm sure any creative person will know that some projects come to you and say, I need you to make me please. And it's not just like, you sitting by yourself like, that would be a cool idea. This came to me fully formed and was like, make me. So for the last 5 years, I have been, going through and rewatching all the series, which some of them I've never done, chronologically. I grew up like you, watching reruns on TV, scrambled out of order, usually just the episodes that they're sort of, algorithm decided were the most popular, or the most TV viewable on repeat. And so going through them chronologically has been an incredible experience. And then, taking notes, doing drafts of art, and then soon I'll be starting the art process for real in full. And I'm so excited to bring this project to the world. It's still looking for a publishing home, but I'm so honored to be bringing it into the world. I think it's going to be a powerful divination tool, and hopefully something that can bridge the worlds between Star Trek fans and spirituality and occult interested people. I'm thinking of it as a project that will, if you don't know anything about tarot or divination, it will be kind of a nice introduction, and help teach about the system. And they say that if you have a tarot deck, you can tell the story of any person, any human experience, that it contains the full kind of gamut of humanity and its experiences. And I think that fits Star Trek very well with its utopian ideals and its grand story of humanity expanding itself into the rest of the universe and encountering other people and learning about itself along the way, you know, and humanity's particular special gifts and foibles.
Yeah, and you know, we had one of the episodes of this show, Finders Keepers, with a historian of the tarot, and she is one of the curators at the Morbid Anatomy, and so we'll put the link below. But you know, I do love this idea of the tarot deck being a symbolic picture of the cosmos, or of you know, our experience within the cosmos, and also the idea of Star Trek being kind of a you know, a microcosm as well. And I don't think you'll have any problems finding a publisher for that. But you know, it is interesting because we do have another speaker in this fair, an author named Eric Davis, whose book High Weirdness chronicles a lot of the science fiction, the crossroads between spirituality, the occult, hallucinogenic drugs, and science fiction in the 1970s. So you guys are really well paired in this
Cool.
in that regard. But I wanted to switch gears now because you live in Salem, Massachusetts, and
I do.
I have another really convoluted question for you, which is my specialty.
Sure.
But I saw on your website how you talk about Pawtucket being a colonized region, and that you know, your interest is in sort of decolonizing, at least at an intellectual and spiritual level, a lot of what had happened historically there. And Salem obviously has its own dark history, and you know, sort of like Hey Jude in the modern era, it's been sort of a gateway for people to take a sad song and make it better, and it's become sort of a new central nexus for a lot of very progressive thinking people, and really spiritually deep people such as yourself. And so I guess you know, my big question is, you know, what drew you there, and is it it's obviously rooted in the history of spiritualism and witchcraft and things like that, but you know, maybe speak about your personal experience with Salem and deciding to move there.
Yeah. So it's funny, I actually grew up only a couple miles from here, just north of Boston. And, you know, I spent all my 20s away from here. I lived in England and in San Francisco and in Brooklyn. And then coming back to Massachusetts, Salem, it was funny, it was not my idea. Everyone else around me was like, so you're going to Salem next? Like, that's the logical next move for you, right? And it was like everyone else knew before me that this was the logical place for me to go. I had kind of resisted coming back to Massachusetts, and but I think that part of this situation here, where it's become the witch city and people are drawn here as like a spiritual witchcraft tourism town, is because there's so much healing that needs to happen on this land. New England, Massachusetts, I mean, this soil is just soaked in blood, to be frank. The genocide that happened here in colonial times and that is ongoing, you know, it was just last year in 2020 that they tried to decommission the I think it's the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. They tried to take away their rights and their land in 2020. And so this is an ongoing healing situation. And growing up in Massachusetts, pretty much all we learned in history class was the Revolutionary War and colonial times, and the Pilgrims came on the Mayflower, and then the Indians taught them to plant corn. And growing up, you always had the sense like, there's something missing from this story. Something is unfinished here. There is massive, massive healing that needs to happen on this land. And the fact that this town is such a draw for witchcraft and spiritual seekers is a great opening for that conversation to be happening. something that really frustrates me is that a lot of the reading material on the sort of true history of what happened here is very academic and dry, is from the colonizer's perspective, and or that, you know, the colonizer anthropologist's perspective, which is very kind of dry and detached and talks about indigenous people as if they're relics of the past. And so it's tough to kind of get through all of the propaganda, essentially, of the story of the Mayflower and the Pilgrims and the colonizer settlements here, to really get to what really is going on, what's needed here for healing. And I think one of the first steps is just talking about it and being really honest about it. And
you're coming from a way different point of view though, right? Because you're just connected in the present to like a living thing. It's not, you know, you're not coming at it as a historian per se.
right, but I'm very interested in the history. You know, I've always been a
Yeah.
big reader, and I want to know. I want to know what really happened. I want the story. I'm just such a slut for story, and it's the best teaching method, in my opinion. Storytelling and, you know, of course, being a good example and setting an example, being a role model are two of the best ways to teach. And I feel like we need more of that in this area, both in this general spirituality and in the spirituality linked to the land here, because this is the place that has experienced European colonization the longest, right? Of anywhere in North America. This place has been going through genocide and colonization longer than any other place in the United States.
Was I mean, you know, the Salem witch trials and things that happened in the early colonial times, you know, 17th and 18th century, have been, you know, I don't want to say well documented, but probably pretty well documented, or there's a body of knowledge about that. But, you know, when I think of like the 19th century and the early 20th century and spirituality and femininity, I often think of like Lilydale and the spiritualist, and the fact that so much of the suffragette movement sort of emanated out of Lilydale. And I wonder what was happening in Salem, if you even know, in like the 19th century and early 20th century. Was there a concentration of suffragettes and spiritualists that were interested in healing there then, or do we not know? Or had the culture pretty much been so decimated in terms of witches and herbalists and practitioners that Salem had no presence of that until much more recent times? I don't know if you know any of that.
My understanding, I'm not actually sure too much about the particular history of what was going on here in the late 1900s, late 1800s, early 20th century, but I do know that the witchcraft situation in Salem really started in earnest in like the 90s with Laurie Cabot and Laurie Bruno, who really worked hard to bring witchcraft to the mainstream and to make this a tourist destination. And that previous to that, Salem was really a maritime history center. It was more about that aspect of the history. And, you know, of course, the witch trials was always this very sensational part of the history. But to my understanding, the real focus on there are real live witches in Salem today, and you can come see them and buy their stuff, really came out of the 90s. And part of that big 90s surge in interest in the spiritual and the occult. You know, you had Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and you had Charmed and Buffy, and Wiccanism was making this huge popular resurgence, and of course Harry Potter. And that to my eye, and of course growing up here in this area in the 90s, that's what I personally witnessed. Was Salem was either where you went on Halloween or where you avoided at absolutely all costs on Halloween because of the crush of tourists, right?
Yeah.
So either you were into that and you wanted to come soak it up, or you were like, oh hell no, I'm staying home. I don't want to get into that.
I wonder what your thoughts are, and maybe not so much from a moralistic point of view, but maybe more just about the whole idea of like homogeneity and commodification of the occult, which, you know, in its like most standard interpretation, the word is literally derived of the Latin word for secret. And so
Mhm.
now it's become mainstream, which makes it much more able to be protected by the laws and familiarized, and so
Mhm.
safer for practitioners. And at the same time, it is increasingly becoming more product driven, I guess you could say. And I wonder, uh, you know, again, not at a moralistic level, but how does that sort of affect somebody like you who is very sensitive to the spirit world and then having to do presentations like this? I mean, and unfortunately, and I, you know,
Yeah. No, it is. It's really interesting to be a professional spirit worker, and to have to do that in a capitalist society. It is kind of a trip, honestly. And it's up to the individual practitioner to figure out what their boundaries are. Personally, when I was living in San Francisco and Brooklyn, it was actually almost more intense just because of the number of people around you at all times. And here it's kind of less densely populated. It's still a city. Salem is weird. It's a city, but it's also a small town. So like, you know, everyone else who lives here, but it sees millions of tourists a year, and it's a huge destination for people. So there's this weird, like, it is a city, but it's not a city, and you know everyone, but you don't. Um, and as a destination, it's full of witch shops. And for me, when I the way I personally kind of deal with that is I tend to avoid the center of town as much as possible during tourist season, because there's just so much people from out of town bring so much of their stuff and their energy and their interest. And you're on the downside, sometimes you feel kind of like an attraction in Disney World, and people are just like, "Ooh, are you a witch?" Like, click. Not really taking it seriously, or they're just like sort of looking for the sensational thrill. And then you have people who are coming here almost as a pilgrimage, like, I need to connect with someone who works in this area. I do read at a local shop in town during October, a shop with really good boundaries. And I think that's one of the keys, is you have to have really, it all comes down to good boundaries, really. Boundaries with yourself and with your visitors, right? So we keep it really a tight organization. You cannot show up to your reading drunk or stoned, which happens so much because people are here on vacation. They go out drinking. They're like, "Yeah, I'll get a reading, woo!" And that's not conducive to a good experience for the reader or the person getting a reading. So you have to keep those boundaries in mind. And you'll find those boundaries also reflected on the law books. You can tell a lot about the history of spirituality in a city based on the laws that it has in place around regulating what usually gets legally called fortune telling, right? So like San Francisco, where I started out, had regulations because it had been a Wild West town, and there were all kinds of con artists that they had to put things on the books, like, all right, you have to pay this initial fee to get registered, and you have to pay an annual fee every year. You have to be registered as a fortune teller, and that helps them regulate some of the scams going on, basically. And similar with Salem, you have to have been a resident for a year or have to be working here for a year before you can start reading. It's actually quite a regulated industry in areas like Salem, where you have a large percentage of people doing this.
I mean, I really appreciate how articulate you are in all of this, Paige, and you obviously have devoted your life in a way that really resonates and is very clear. Um, as we get into the outro here, what can you tell me about some other projects or things that you're really focused on now? Things that will be available, because obviously this is a book fair, and we want everyone to take an interest in the guests that have been a part of the fair, and just also some maybe, or if you have any things that are just of interest as far as research or passions go, you know, take us out with a little bit
Yeah,
of some
so
Paige.
Cool. Well, I just started this season's journaling course for getting to know your holy helping spirits, which is called Bounding Tiger Journal Dragon. And like most of my offerings, that name was given to me by the offering itself. I like to do, spiritual sessions with my own offerings to talk to them. Who are you? What's your name? What's your purpose? What are you here to teach and share? And so that's just started now, but I will be running it again at the beginning of next year after my annual New Year's readings, which is one of my biggest events. I love them so much. People have been coming back for New Year's readings for years and years and years. And I love my New Year's clients so much, giving them a little peek at the year ahead, giving them an opportunity to think about where am I now and where do I want to be, right? So that'll be coming up in December. And I like to offer an October special reading, which I think this year I'll be doing with the Edward Gorey deck. He created a card deck called the Fantod pack, only 20 cards, but I find it gives great readings. I started reading with that deck when I was in San Francisco, the Cartoon Art Museum, which is one of my favorite museums in the world. They have a birthday party for Edward Gorey every year in February, and they asked me to come read these cards at the event. And it started out kind of like as a, for entertainment silliness. And then I was like, oh wait, no, these give good readings. This is a good deck, even with only 20 cards, all silly things like the feather, the blue dog, the yellow bird. But when you lay them out, it's an excellent reading. And it's great for October with his spooky imagery.
Paige,
Yeah.
let me give your website again. It's Paige Zaferiou, paigezaferiou.com. And I just wanted to thank you again for really wonderful and enlightening and such a great, articulate talk.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you so much for having me. This was such an enjoyable conversation. I really have enjoyed talking with you about all this.